Welcome everyone. This is my presentation on predicting or trying to the 2026 Stanley Cup Final. So first, just a little methodology to orient us. I started with PCA analysis and then K-means clustering, graph analysis, weighted team ratings, and then my predictions. So first we're gonna get into, the first thing I did was PCA. So I kind of gathered these main metrics. This is all from Natural Stat Trick. So it's like Corsi percentage, which is kind of like possession, and then you have like expected goals, and then chances for, shooting percentage, and then save percentage. And so what the PCA, what PCA does is it kind of it makes your data set smaller, so you have less variables. There's not less variables, but it's like now we're going from these 10 to just 4. So you can kind of see in like PCA 1, so the higher numbers are like the ones that they're more like relevant for that specific component. So like the first PC is kind of about possession, so it's like Corsi, and then you also have like chances for and expected goals for. So it's kind of just like having the puck and dominating your opponent. So that's kind of what I called it, like team dominance and control. The second PC is more about finishing efficiency. So it's a lot of like shooting percentage. And then the third one is almost all save percentage. So I just said, called that one goaltending. And then the fourth one is not, super obvious. I kind of just called it like shot type and style, because it's not super clear what's going on, and then I ended up mostly using just the first 3 since they were the most obvious and contributed the most to the data. So with this, I did some clustering, kind of just to see the profile of different teams in the leagues. So I did 3 clusters here, and you can kind of see that cluster 0, this blue one, it's low in both team dominance and shooting efficiency, and then you go over to PC1 here. So this one's higher in shooting efficiency, but it's pretty average in team dominance. And then this green portion here, they're very dominant, but not super efficient. And then they kind of all have like relatively similar average-ish goaltending values. So now this is the same graph, but colored by whether they made the playoffs or not. So you can see here that these are the only 3 teams in cluster 0 that made the playoffs. And then this is kind of an explanation of, maybe why they made the playoffs, even though they were a bad team. So like the Wild, they had like kind of severe injuries for a lot of that season. And then the Capitals and the Islanders were kind of just the teams that ended up sneaking in 2024. So, not super great, kind of just, the very bottom of the, teams that made the playoffs. They were decent, but not great goal differentials kind of across the board. So essentially what we're seeing here is that the teams around here, higher in PC1 and PC2, are the ones that are making the playoffs more consistently. So now I kind of wanted to look at, you can make the playoffs, but what are you going to do in the playoffs? So here are 2 graphs. This is PC1 and PC2, and then this is an aggregate of PC1 and 2, and then goaltending, PC3. So you can kind of see how the teams in the past 3 years have performed. So what you can kind of notice from these graphs is the President's Trophy. That's the team that has the most points after the regular season. These teams are very, high in the shooting efficiency. They're higher in PC2, whereas the teams that end up actually making the Stanley Cup Final are often lower and more dominant in general. This is an interesting one. The Golden Knights won in 2023, and they were not a great team in the regular season. But they did have spectacular goaltending, and generally, they had a good coach, a lot of roster depth. So this one was a little weird, but you can kind of explain it maybe by the goaltending and just their general roster. But pretty much what we're seeing is that being very dominant comes out on top when it comes to making the playoffs and then eventually going to the Stanley Cup. So this is this year's data. So interestingly enough, if you're to go back here, like this area is kind of what you're looking at for making the Stanley Cup, and this year we don't really have anyone there. So it's not super obvious what's going to happen. But essentially, these are the teams, the ones that are circled are, there's 4 teams from the East and 4 teams from the West. And I made like this distance to the cup metric. So it's kind of like choosing a centroid. And then these are the teams that made the playoffs that are closest to that, general profile of a team that has made Stanley Cup finals the past 3 years. And then this is just the other graph here. So kind of you're generally looking at teams around this area and this area that are likely going to be the types of teams who will go far this playoffs. So these are kind of just graphs to look at, but I wanted to kind of make it into an actual metric. So this is what I was talking about earlier. So this is the weighted average of the PCs. So the PCs have like kind of different weights when it comes to like how much variance they're explaining. So I just weighted it based on that. So PC 1 is like the most, and then PC2 is the second most, etc. So this is basically that centroid that I was talking about earlier is what this is. So this is cup score, slightly different. It's kind of just how good you are in general. So it's like the teams that are at the top of all metrics, doing really well, good goalkeeping, good dominance, good efficiency. So you can see, Colorado, Tampa Bay, Carolina, Dallas, the teams you'd expect to be at the top are at the top. This is the next one. So this is who is close to, so how likely, or how like close to the profile of a Stanley Cup team you are. So kind of our final 5 are the Avalanche, the Senators, the Golden Knights, the Lightning, and the Hurricanes. So you can see here, like Colorado's far and away the best team, kind of as you might expect. And then you kind of have, Ottawa, VGK, Tampa Bay, and Carolina as like the next 4, and then it kind of drops off from there. So after all this, what are my predictions at the end of the day? It's a little hard to make, but I would say my front runners right now, it's kind of chalk. I don't like it that much, but as you saw in these graphs, like the Avalanche and the Hurricanes really seem like they do stand the best chance to go far. Avalanche are just really good, and they're also, on that right side of the graph, that PC1 versus PC2 graph. Same with the Hurricanes. I was on the Lightning for a while, but if you look at them on that graph, they're really in that area of like the Winnipeg Jets, like Boston, like teams who have won the President's Trophy previously and just not performed well in the playoffs. And they actually just won in overtime, like literally 15 minutes ago. So now they're 1-1, but it's looking like that series against Montreal is gonna be tough. Also, the Senators, I really think if they played anyone other than the Hurricanes, they would probably stand a chance at making the conference final. So it's an unfortunate draw. And then the Golden Knights, I think they have a great shot. Not the best team in the regular season, but they ended up winning the Pacific. So yeah, I would say look out for these teams, but these teams you'll probably see in May. So yeah.